Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome to the podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about something very, very pertinent to our world today, and that is multicultural education. So whether you're an educator or you're someone that's just interested in how the educational system has impacted the kids of today, please tune in. We're going to be talking about an important topic and how we can view it as Christians. Our podcast today is grounded in truth, an exploration on the intersectionality of multicultural education and virtue. We're going to be discussing what multicultural education is, how it's impacted our culture, and how you can view it as you head into the education field. So before we go into a Christian perspective on multicultural education, how it's impacted our culture, let's talk about its origins, its history. It was sparked by the civil rights movement, according to this author, and it pushed against the melting pot ideology that our society so pushes against. It aimed to preserve minority culture from eroding under mainstream American culture. So according to Mainstream Culture, Ossergud wrote an article and he talks about why we need multicultural education and what multicultural education is. So he said, with the idea of further understanding the diverse populations, pedagogical strategies such as multicultural education, culture-relevant pedagogy are grounded and justified. So he says these are important things. He said, however, with the multiple definitions and explanations, there is not necessarily an agreed definition of multiculturalism and multicultural education among scholars and practitioners. So multicultural education can take multiple forms. It can be a justification for things like ESL or English language learner classes, but it can also be a justification for more of an ideology. And today we're going to be just discerning one of those mainstream ideologies with an article by Carlo, and he is going to talk about what makes a good multicultural educator and why multicultural education is important, and then we're going to respond to that. So here in our article, this author is addressing the issues, quote unquote, of the melting pot. So when people brought up about this idea that America is this melting pot, we have this beautiful flavor because we have so many diverse nations that are just throwing in their ideas, their religions, their traditions. This is what he said was a result of that. He said, the brew turned out to be Anglo-Saxon again, reinforcing the ethnocentrism of the majority and convincing ethnic minorities that their ethnicity and cultural heritage were illegitimate and hence needed to be abandoned. And so now we get to how this applies to the education system. Carlo, because he's afraid of melting pot culture, he's afraid of minority cultures being devoured by mainstream American culture, quote unquote. So he comes up with 3 qualifiers of a multicultural educator. What can you do to be a good multicultural educator, according to this author? And we're going to just hone in on the second today. We could talk about the first one and the third one, but the second one says, a multicultural educator should have cultural competence that locates excellence within the context of students' communities and cultural identities. So I think we need to ask a question after this, and this is the real question, which is, as asserted by Carlo, can excellence be accurately identified by the context of students' communities and cultural identities? And I really couldn't think of a better educator to comment on this topic and help us figure out this question than Clive Staples Lewis. He was an English teacher for years. He wrote many just respected and renowned books that we love to this day. And he wrote a lot on the education system and how we can be better educators. And so he wrote The Abolition of Man, which is also called Reflections on Education, with special reference to the teaching of English in the upper forms of schools. And in this, he emphasizes the importance of predicates of values, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But he argued against subjective standards based on the Greco-Roman concept of the head, the belly, and the chest. And so let's go into human dignity and how C.S. Lewis said we can treat our multicultural students and any student with respect. So in his book, The Abolition of Man, Lewis supports students' human dignity, and he tells educators how to teach well in order to acknowledge each of your students being a human in God's world. And so he supports human dignity with the Greco-Roman example of the head, the belly, and the chest. If you're not familiar, your head is your intellect, your belly is your carnal instincts, your animal instincts, and then your chest is the mitigator, the area of discretion between the two. It's he says what the ancients would say made you human. It's the ability to choose right or wrong, to say no to yourself even if you want something, and to say yes even if something's hard. And so Lewis said that we need to train ourselves to respond appropriately to any one thing. So if something is bad, our heart should be repulsed by that. If something is good, then we should love that. And his whole argument throughout his entire book is that educators are missing the point. So much of the time we're trying to teach content, and we're trying to teach them how to avoid the bad things. But really, we should be forming the hearts to love good so dearly that when evil comes to them, they don't even consider it as an option. So Lewis also brings up this concept that ties to this called predicates of value. And these are the things that your tests are going to be evaluating. So he says the right defense against false sentiments is to inculcate just sentiments. By starving the sensibility of our pupils, we only make them easier prey to the propagandist when he comes. So what propaganda are we going to be pushing against? Let's look at some examples of predicates of value in our daily school lives. And so Lewis really ties this idea that humans are unique in that they have a chest to mitigate their head and belly, and he does this through an argument for the value of predicates of value. And this is really applicable to schools because he ties this to an English textbook that was used in secondary ed. And in this textbook, they were arguing against the use of value terms, of saying something is good or bad or right or wrong, because they said that is manipulative, that is subjective, and things that are tied to emotion can never be true. And Lewis pushes against that. And a couple predicates of value we'll see in the education system might be something like the essay is well written, or cheating is wrong, or that is a great book. Lewis would say if the essay is well written, it is objectively well written. If cheating is wrong, it is always wrong, no matter what culture you came from, and that is a great book. That book is objectively great if it is a great book indeed. And so what makes things great is the fact that they're tied to absolute truth, the fact that they are tied to the truth that God made in the world. So Lewis pushes against any ideology that would tend to define these terms as subjective based on your perspective, because while he said unique perspectives are important, he proves through the cultures that truth stays the same. So let's look at how Lewis's book is very multicultural. And so now we get to the multicultural defense of the abolition of man. And so here is a quote by Ray and P in their article in 2019. They say that the abolition of man shows that diverse cultures, ancient Egyptian, Babylonian, Old Norse, Chinese, Indian, Jewish, Roman, Greek, Australian, Aboriginal, and American Indian, underpin the Tao. And what is the Tao, you might ask? Well, the Tao is kind of that pivot point of Lewis's argument. It's what this is all centered on. And the Tao represents absolute truth as reflected through all the cultures throughout history. So look at all the cultures in the list that I just mentioned. C.S. Lewis references all of those as a defense for ultimate truth. And so education is good because it is based on truth. And culture adds value to that because it affirms that truth that already exists. Now, what happens when culture contradicts truth? Well, the truth wins out. The truth is the most important thing. Teachers should always emphasize truth first. But culture is a great reference point to emphasize truth in students' everyday lives and inculcate a love for truth within their hearts. So you shall not steal. That is true despite what culture you come from. But if you have a story about stealing, some kind of fable, some kind of folklore from your culture, and your teacher references that in class to point you back to the truth that stealing is wrong, then that is a beautiful thing. So yes, C.S. Lewis says that truth is the most important thing, but culture can affirm truth and give it life. And because of the Tao, C.S. Lewis says that now we need to connect with our students by training their hearts to love good, to hate evil. And I think this is a beautiful thing because we can even use their cultures to connect to experiences of good and evil to help them understand it better. And so Lewis explains it beautifully. He says, Shelley, having compared the human sensibility to an Aeolian lyre, goes on to add that it differs from a lyre in having a power of internal adjustment. So you can adjust your heart. Like a lyre, like a harp, your heart can be tuned towards the things that are good and evil, and when a good thing blows your direction, it would play the right chords on your heart. When an evil thing comes down your directions, it would play the right chords in your heart so that you react appropriately in those circumstances. Lewis also says that Aristotle says that the aim of education is to make the pupil like and dislike what he ought. And so now I'm getting to my bold assertion that good education is inherently multicultural. And I'm identifying multicultural, like Carlo did earlier in his article. There's nothing wrong with teaching English to English learners with extra support. There is nothing wrong with bringing in diverse stories from around the world to implement into your curriculum. But that is not the end goal of education. The end goal of education is good education. And good education is inherently multicultural because it is pinned on the Tao. It is pinned on ultimate truth. It is pinned on God's word and the way the world was formed. And so when you say things like stealing is wrong, this is going to resonate with your students. And if it doesn't resonate with them, we should train their hearts to hate evil and to love good. And so let's go into the practical outlook of that, which is training our students to love individual virtue. And just to hammer this home one more time, Lewis says, until modern times, all teachers believed that objects could merit approval or disapproval, or reverence or contempt. And so the whole world, until very recently, believed that emotions were made for us to acknowledge truth in the world. Scientific fact is not the only thing we can look to for truth. We can use the hearts that God gave us and the minds that God gives us to discover truth and to love truth dearly. And so why is multicultural education important? Well, let's look at that very specifically. Well, good multicultural education is important because God loves the nations and he made them in his image. And the beautiful thing about God making people in his image is that they are like him. And when you come from different cultures, sometimes different cultures see the truth of God in a more accurate way that you could from your culture, because every culture has beautiful elements to it, and every culture is filled with different kinds of evils. So when you're able to talk with people of different perspectives in the classroom, it can better help you to love the Lord and to see his character within these people. Yeah, Psalm 86:9 says, all the nations you have made shall come and worship before you, O Lord, and shall glorify your name. God made the nations to worship before him, to glorify his name, and he made each one of them individually. And so when we're looking at the practical application of all of this, because it seems all very heady, we can see how to culture a love for good and a hatred for evil with specific virtues in the classroom. And the Canyon Center for Character Education published an article, and it kind of divided these up for us really conveniently. So we have civic, moral, performance, and intellectual virtues. And these help us as educators to see the areas of growth needed with our students, even within how our student does an assignment. So, for example, we could have civic virtue, justice. Justice has a lot to do with how students treat each other, has a lot to do with classroom management, classroom discipline. Moral virtues, we have something like honesty. And I have a story with this. I had a student I was tutoring. He was Muslim and he's from Islam, and we became really close. And we would talk about the Quran, we'd talk about the Bible, we'd have really good conversations. And I was his tutor, and he liked to hide his homework from me because he didn't like to do his homework like no middle school boy wants to be doing homework after school for hours. But one day I knew he was bringing in an assignment, and I asked him where it was, and he said, oh, I don't know, miss, I can't find it. And he said, miss, I don't want to do, I can't find it. Maybe I don't have it to do it today. I don't remember. And he looked very suspicious. I also saw an assignment sticking out of his bag. I said, hey, do you mind if I take a look? And so we found the assignment together, and he looked really bashful. And I said, okay, well, let's work on this. And I had been reading the Quran recently, and I said, hey, did you know the Quran really really values honesty. Did you know it says that it's really important to be truthful? Then his face just fell. And I had tried to bring up the Bible before. I tried to bring up examples of why truth is important, why it's important to be honest and to not cheat on your assignments and to work hard. But this really resonated with him. And the cool thing was, is we got to take that virtue, that absolute virtue, and tie his culture to it in a way that he could understand. And so then from then, he went, Miss, I don't know how to keep all the commands of the Quran. It's just too much. And so we got to have a really good gospel conversation. And so when you tie people's culture to absolute truth, it's really powerful. There are performance virtues like diligence, working hard. That's very straightforward with how students do their assignments. Intellectual, like discernment. And that's kind of what we're doing today. We can look through a book and say, what's right, what's wrong, what's correct about the author's perspective? Is there anything that you disagree with? Discernment is something that we should train in our students so as they go into the world, they can see truth for what it is. And so I've brought up a couple examples already. My tutoring example with my student, we talked about C.S. Lewis and his life as an educator. But I'm going to bring in one more educator, and she's been super inspirational to me, and that's my mom. And I asked her yesterday, why is virtue important in the classroom? And she tied it to curriculum. And I think this is an aspect we haven't really talked about yet. So this is exciting. She's been an English teacher, a literature teacher for years. So let's hear what she has to say about virtue in the classroom. This is what she texted me. She said, choosing quality literature, often in the classics, lends itself to fostering virtue. Stories like Great Expectations, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, or The Death of Ivan Ilyich all point readers towards what is good, true, and beautiful. These aren't feel-good plots, but they highlight how suffering builds character. Compassion, justice, and humility are praised, while greed, selfishness, and vanity are exposed as vices. Students who discuss literature connect it to their own lives, and that's where culture comes in, and write about it, can then examine virtue through the lens of suffering, and are more likely to question their own response to life's difficulties. Virtue is built one decision at a time, and hopefully that will translate across the classroom into the student's life itself. Recent events. Let's tie this all back to our modern day. Why is virtue important? Why is multicultural education important? And why am I making things so complicated? Why am I asking some questions and saying don't fall for the lie of pursuing multicultural education over good education because good education is inherently multicultural? Well, because the world is hard right now. It's always been hard. And some recent events, some very tragic school shootings, the death of Charlie Kirk, these have impacted the lives of our students. Right now is the time for truth. Right now is the time to stop compromising because things are popular. We need to pursue what is good, what is true, what is noble, and our students will learn from that. Albert Bandura is a famous educational psychologist, and he said that students learn by observing teachers. And in an article on Rights in 2020, behavior conveys information to observers about the characteristics of appropriate responses to display in certain situations. Observers are to abstract common attributes exemplified by this model and then to generate a behavior that resembles that which the model is inclined to exhibit under the similar circumstances. Our actions model virtue, and how we respond conveys lessons about how we should approach hard times, how we should work hard, or if we should not work hard, and if it is important to have a discernment. So let's take this social learning theory that we were learning in college, let's apply it to our lives, and let's love truth, because then our students will love truth by watching our example too. Let's hate evil, and our students will hate evil when seeing our passion against what is wrong. And let's choose to do those things, and then let our students connect their cultural experiences to that and work through what is true, what is good, what is beautiful. Yeah. We need to trust in the Lord right now. The Lord is sovereign. The Lord has not changed. The Lord is in control. And no matter what happens when you pursue truth, He's going to use you. But I warn you, when you lead and you do not love truth, then you will train your students not to love truth as well. You will treat truth like a joke. So pursue truth, love it, because that's what the Lord created you and your students to do. Thanks so much for listening today. I really hope this sparked some new ideas in your mind, that this will get you thinking. And even if you don't agree with me, I do hope this helps you to see multicultural education from a new viewpoint, that it will make you a stronger educator at the end of the day. So thank you so much for your time.